When we last left Joseph of Arimathea and his friend Nicodemus in scene 2 of the legend of Joseph of Arimathea, Jesus had just cleared out the temple. He had cast out the money changers, flipping over their tables. The two thieves, Gestus and Demas, were gathering up the coins and slipping away. The Pharisees and the Sanhedrin were immediately upset at what Jesus did. And they left to plan their attack against their nemesis. Joseph sent his friend Nicodemus to see if he could calm down the order of the Pharisees. After speaking with Philip, one of Jesus' disciples, Joseph then exits to go and find Nicodemus. Here in scene 3 of the legend of Joseph of Arimathea, we find Joseph approaching the house of Annas, looking for his friend. A few crowd members are standing around, quietly milling about the streets. When they see Joseph, they nod to him, and then they quickly exit the scene. Nicodemus runs to Joseph. When he sees him nearly almost out of breath, he says, "Oh, thank the Lord our God, I found you." "I have been looking all over Jerusalem for you," says Joseph. "What is it, my old friend? Are you all right?" Nicodemus shakes his head. "Caiaphas has called a secret meeting of the Sanhedrin council." "What?" said Joseph. "Why wasn't I informed?" "I've been trying to reach you. By Jehovah's grace," says Nicodemus, "you are a hard man to track down. Come, they are meeting at Annas' house. It's just a few blocks from here." Joseph muses, concerned. Annas' house? That's a bit unorthodox, don't you think, even for Caiaphas? "People change, my friend, people change," said Nicodemus. "Fear makes them change. Come on, we had better hurry or we'll miss the entire meeting." Joseph and Nicodemus cross the street and present themselves to a few Sanhedrin Jewish soldiers who escort them to Annas' house where they can join the Sanhedrin meeting already in progress. Caiaphas says, "What Jesus did this morning in the temple is inexcusable. Once again, he has blatantly defied our purity laws, an act which, according to our tradition, is punishable by death. Again, I ask you, what are we going to do with this man from Galilee?" One of the Pharisees pipes up, "His disruptive behavior this morning will cost us dearly with the merchant guilds. They will expect us to cover their losses. And what will Pilate think when he hears about this? He'll use it as an excuse to get his hands on our operation. Either that or shut us down." Another Pharisee adds, "Our whole way of life is being threatened, Caiaphas. At every turn, Jesus challenges our teachings and undermines our authority over the people. If we don't act soon, we will lose all our advantages. A fourth Pharisee continues to speak. We have acted, or have you forgotten our new alliance with the Sadducees? But every attempt to trap Jesus in his own words has failed, and we end up being the brunt of his sick jokes. Gamaliel, an old and respected Pharisee and member of the Sanhedrin, quiets the audience. My religious brothers, the time has come for a different, more permanent solution to our problem. The first Pharisee adds, I agree with Gamaliel. We cannot trap Jesus with his words, and we cannot stop his actions. He knows our scriptures too well, and although his methods of interpretation are unique, his actions stay within the letter of the law. We must approach the situation differently. What do the Herodians say about all of this? Annas adds, they are not opposed to eliminating our mutual problem. They only require that we handle the details lest they lose their precious face with Rome. Pushing his way forward in disgust, Joseph of Arimathea addresses the Sanhedrin council by directing his comments to Caiaphas. Council members, listen to yourselves speak. We are devoted to the good of our people, and already I have heard enough scheming and plotting to know that no good will come out of this meeting. Caiaphas, why are we meeting here in your father-in-law's house and not in the temple hall where we normally hold our plenary sessions? If Jesus of Nazareth is so important to the affairs of state, we ought to be meeting where the domestic seat of government is established. Annas quickly adds, now is not the time to be proper, Senator. Now is the time for decisive action, which will save all of Jerusalem and Judea. Caiaphas adds, Joseph, let's be reasonable. We simply choose this location because we did not want to be disturbed anymore by Jesus' teachings and the disruption of the crowds. With each passing moment, we are losing control over our own people. With each teaching, Jesus invites the mob to question our authority, doctrine, and practice. Annas adds, Jesus of Nazareth is a threat to the whole order of the Sanhedrin. He deceives the crowds with his miracles. Now that he has raised Lazarus from the dead, our people have started to hail him as Jesus the Christ, Messiah and King. If we do not put an immediate stop to Jesus, Rome itself will move against us and destroy us. Echoes of hear, hear, and you speak the truth, and listen to him resound throughout the Sanhedrin council. One of the Pharisees says, we should eliminate all traces of Jesus' authority Every miracle ought to be wiped out and erased from our written records, including Lazarus himself. Gamaliel again hushes the crowd. Gentlemen, Lazarus is not the problem, nor could we counter every miracle Jesus has performed, no matter how creative our methods may be. No, the real threat is Jesus himself and what he teaches. Consider his teachings on eating unclean food, on personal hygiene and purification, and on working during the Sabbath. Remember his claims to have a personal relationship with God. He calls God his Father. And my sources even inform me that at the Feast of the Dedication, Jesus claimed to be God. No, my religious brothers, it is these teachings and claims which are turning the crowds away from our laws and established religion. If we are to free ourselves from the catastrophe that awaits us, Jesus himself will need to be eliminated. And it is the crowds who will need to be the one to kill their prophet from Nazareth. Persuade the crowds to turn against Jesus, and his fame will die in the eyes of the world. Their betrayal will ruin any authority he might possess. Strike down the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. Wait a minute, Nicodemus shouts. You can't do this! Jesus has brought the righteousness of God to earth. From the moment he started to speak and draw his disciples to him, and even this morning in the temple, Jesus has only worked to justify the oppressed. He speaks God's truth. He does God's work. And no one can dispute that power of God is not a part of his life. Joseph adds, look, I know that I have been away from Jerusalem a lot these past 3 years. But everything that I have heard from what I have seen with my own 2 eyes makes me believe that Jesus is indeed fulfilling scriptural prophecy. At the least, he is a prophet himself. And at the most, he is exactly who he says he is. The Son of Man. Caiaphas laughs. You say that Jesus is a prophet? But I say, what great prophet has ever come from the likes of Galilee? Nicodemus points out, you forget Elijah of Tishbe, our greatest prophet to ever live. Elijah himself came from Galilee. Joseph turns to Gamaliel. Honored Gamaliel, you have always been a reasonable man and a great teacher of the law. Can you not see the good that is in Jesus of Nazareth? Yes, his teachings stretch us. Yes, his practices challenge us. Yes, he relates to God like no one we have ever seen. But instead of plotting to kill him, shouldn't we be supporting him? He speaks of God's kingdom. He invites all of us to repent and live under God's influence. Where is the harm in that? Can't you stand for that? Gamaliel folds his arms and pauses for a moment, then shakes his head and turns away. Annas says, "Fellow countrymen, the time for debating with Jesus is over. Now is the time to save our way of life." Caiaphas adds, "Gamaliel is right. We must instigate a permanent solution to our conflict with Jesus. We must turn the mob against him. We must then convince Rome to destroy him, for we cannot sentence a man to death under our current imperialism." Annas adds, "Joseph, you are an acquaintance of Pontius Pilate. Despite the differences of your opinion, we still hold you as an honored member of this ruling council. Will you plead our case before the procurator?" Joseph shakes his head. "Absolutely not. Even if I agreed with you, I could never rise up against my own great nephew. And besides, it is against Jewish law to turn him as a Jewish citizen over to a foreign authority." Caiaphas angrily shouts, "You are not the one to know the law, Senator. We too are highly skilled in its interpretation. And you are not the only one with a connection to Rome. Even as we speak, there is one hidden in Jesus' own midst who will betray him for us." Before Joseph or Nicodemus can respond, Caiaphas adjourns the Sanhedrin council. "This meeting is over. By the end of the Passover, our plan to kill Jesus of Nazareth will be accomplished. Jesus has often referred to himself as a sacrificial lamb. Well, if that is what he thinks, that is exactly what we will give the mob." As the Sanhedrin council begins to leave Annas' house, and the Pharisees talk silently together, Joseph pulls Nicodemus aside. "Stay here and try to reason with Caiaphas and Annas and Gamaliel, if you can. Try to make them see the truth of their actions." "What will you do?" asks Nicodemus. Joseph responds, "The only thing that I can do now, I will travel to Bethany and try to warn Jesus of the Sanhedrin's plot to kill him." Scene 4 takes place on March 28th in the morning. Joseph enters the scene, dressed for traveling. He's carrying a wooden staff. He stops for a moment to rest, and he leans upon his staff. At that moment, Gestus and Demas, the two thieves, quickly enter, fleeing a Roman pursuit. Looking behind them as they run, they do not see Joseph leaning on his staff in the road, and they collide with him. Joseph, Gestus, and Demas are all knocked to the ground. The Roman soldiers, led by their centurion Longinus, immediately enters carrying spears, swords, and shields. They surround Gestus and Demas before the two thieves can recover from their mid-road collision with Joseph. One of the soldiers shouts, "There they are! Get them!" Another soldier, wrestling Gestus to the ground, says, "You'll not take any more Roman lives where you're going, you Jewish scum! The Roman soldiers quickly overpower Gestus and Demas. They bind their hands together behind their backs and surround them, preparing to lead them back to Jerusalem. Longinus carefully helps Joseph of Arimathea to his feet. Chuckling, Longinus says, Joseph of Arimathea, you are the last person I'd have expected to see out here on the road to Bethany. Are you all right? It appears Rome owes you a debt of service for helping us apprehend these two ruffians. Even if you did have to use your body as a blocker to stop them. Brushing himself off and picking up his staff, Joseph says, Oh, yes. I suppose I'm quite all right, Longinus. Just a little bruised and battered here and there. But what brings you and your company out this blessed morn? By my count, the last time I saw you, you were with Pontius Pilate. What is our great procurator doing, asking his best Roman centurion to chase these two, what did you call them? Ruffians? Longinus says, we've been tracking these two thieves for months. They've eluded us throughout Jerusalem and its surrounding areas, robbing and murdering Roman citizens. And we believe that they are connected to a zealous underground cult planning to revolt against Rome. This morning they killed one of my Praetorian guards. I see, says Joseph. Well, that would explain things. What are you going to do now that you caught them? We will first take them back to Jerusalem for trial, says Longinus. But there is no doubt in my mind these two murderers are going to hang upon the cross for their crimes against Rome. Joseph says, if what you say is true, and they are found guilty, even our law states that they must die. But I still pity them. No one should have to die like that. But duty is a dirty business, as my father used to say. Longinus says, we Romans say justice first. Joseph, you be careful out here. There is too much conflict in Jerusalem this Passover for my liking. More than I've ever seen before, especially around this Jesus of Nazareth character. To be honest, he seems harmless to me. Just another Jewish fanatic. But he does know how to stir up the crowd. You do well to watch yourself when you're around him. Joseph says, oh, I will, Longinus. I happen to be heading that way myself, and if I meet Jesus, I promise I'll keep my eyes on him. Longinus and Joseph shake hands. Longinus and the Roman soldiers then leave with Gestus and Demas in custody. Joseph continues on to Lazarus' house, where Philip had invited him to come and to meet with Jesus. Arriving, Joseph knocks on the door. Lazarus answers, Joseph! Joseph of Arimathea? Wow! Hey, Mary! Look who's come knocking! It's your Uncle Joseph! Mary, the mother of Jesus, runs and embraces Joseph at the door. Uncle Joseph, my word, what brings you all the way out here? Joseph hugs his niece. Can't an uncle just drop in on his favorite niece during Passover? Well, I trust that you are the one who is taking care of all of these misfits. Looking over, Joseph sees Mary Magdalene, and he greets her. Mary Magdalene nods. She too says, "Joseph, it is good to see you too. Now at least I will have some help looking after all these jokers, especially that great nephew of yours." Philip shouts, "Joseph! Why, I expected you last night, but I guess now is just the goodest time as any for a visit. Come in, make yourself at home." Joseph removes his cloak, hands his walking staff to Philip. "I would have arrived last night, but unforeseen events demanded my attention in Jerusalem. But I am here now." Philip turns to Mary Magdalene. "Mary, would you get that pitcher and bowl so Joseph can wash up? Come, we are just finishing breakfast." Mary Magdalene brings a bowl over to Joseph and fills it with water from a pitcher. Joseph then washes the dust off of his hands and feet. His niece Mary, the mother of Jesus, says, "When did you get back from Cornwall? Father told me that you were too busy entertaining kings and royalty to make it back to the Passover celebration." Joseph says, "I arrived 2 days ago. I'd have arrived sooner, but, well, you know how it is with me. One thing or another always seems to pop up. By the way, Philip, your father sends his blessings. He's continuing his negotiations with the Greeks. I saw him on my way back from Cornwall." Philip chuckles. "He always did speak fondly of you, Joseph. Now, can we get you something to eat or drink? You must have left Jerusalem early this morning in order to get here by this time." Joseph groans. "Yes, indeed. To speak with my great nephew. Is there a place here where I can talk with him in private? I've got some important matters to discuss with him." Mary, the mother of Jesus, nods. "Of course, Uncle. I'll go get him, even if I have to pull him away from Peter and John and the rest of the lot. Lazarus and Philip can show you to the anteroom, and Mary and Martha will bring you some fresh goat's milk to refresh you." "Thank you, niece," Joseph says. "I could use some refreshments right about now." Mary crosses the room and she speaks with her son Jesus, conveying Joseph's request. Lazarus and Philip escort Joseph to a seat. Lazarus stands to find his sister Mary and Martha. Jesus comes over and he happily agrees to speak with his great uncle. And he leaves his group to come to Joseph. Philip leaves Joseph to speak in private with Jesus, as he too returns then to the breakfast table. Jesus embracing Joseph. "Uncle Joseph! It has been a while. I trust the good fortunes are with you. How is Cornwall? Sometimes I miss our travels together." Joseph nods. "You were always a shrewd manager, Jesus. I could have used you on this last trip. King Lud was quite particular about his terms for mining Cornwall's tin. The city has changed much since the last time you accompanied me there. It has grown. Oh, but enough of that. Jesus, I need to talk to you about something serious. Your actions in the temple yesterday, they greatly angered Caiaphas and the Pharisees." "Caiaphas," Jesus says. "Yes, he and his father-in-law continue to stand outside of the kingdom of heaven, and they do not let anyone else enter in either. Look, says Joseph, Caiaphas may be a pompous mule, but he is no fool. And he certainly is not someone to be trifled with. At this time of the year especially, Caiaphas and Annas have persuaded the Sanhedrin to kill you. If you return to Jerusalem, they will arrest you. Now I support you, and so does Nicodemus. But we are only two men. And you have your mother and your friends to think about as well. I suggest that you return to Capernaum, where you will be safe. If not there, at least to Nazareth, where the Roman garrison can protect you if this conflict gets too violent. And Jesus, I think there may be a traitor in your midst, one of your own, who has already sold you out to the Sanhedrin. Jesus thinks for a moment. Uncle Joseph, you are indeed a good man, but I already know that I have a traitor in my midst. I am counting on his betrayal. For if I am not betrayed, my Father's deepest will to save all of humanity from their sins will not be fulfilled. The Son of Man must return to Jerusalem. There he will be handed over to the chief priests and teachers of the law. And they will condemn him to death. Yes, they will. Turning him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. But on the third day, I tell you the truth, I will rise again. My mission has always been to invite my people, Israel, and the whole world to enter into and live under God's end-time rule. However, because my Father is holy and cannot stand the presence of sin, a permanent, innocent sacrifice must be offered. This permanent sacrifice will once and for all wipe out all corruption, past, present, and future, and will allow those who choose to believe in me to enter into God's presence and one day live with him there in glory. Joseph asks, Jesus, you're not making any sense. Do you want to be that sacrificial lamb? Why? Pointing over to Joseph's staff by the door, Jesus says, do you see your staff over there by the door? I tell you the truth, one day that very staff will sprout thorns. You will plant your staff in foreign soil, and it will bloom with flowers. This will be a sign to you, great Uncle Joseph, that your journey is at an end. The same is true for me. A crown of thorns will signify my journey here on this earth is over. Your staff will be a symbol to many people, reminding them of me. My crown will be a symbol reminding my people of the sacrifice that will set them free. Joseph again says, "You're speaking in riddles. I don't understand." Smiling and laughing, Jesus says, "Uncle Joseph, you don't need to understand right now. You just need to believe. Trust me." Sighing, Joseph says, "Well, if I cannot convince you to stay away from Jerusalem, at least promise me that you will be careful around Caiaphas and Annas. Promise me, Jesus." Jesus says, "This I will promise. Soon all of my Father's righteousness will be fulfilled. Now, why don't you stay with us and rest for a while? I know that my mother would love your company and comfort as we continue to celebrate the Passover feast." Jesus places his arm around Joseph's shoulders and leads him back to the breakfast table where the disciples are laughing and eating. Jesus motions for Peter and John and Philip to join them too. Joseph takes a seat next to Jesus' mother Mary. Speaking to Peter, John, and Philip, Jesus says, "Go into Jerusalem and find Samuel and tell him, our rabbi says my appointed time is near. I would like to finish celebrating the Passover with my disciples at your house. Go there and prepare for tonight's Seder meal." Peter, John, and Philip agree, and they leave Lazarus' house. They're laughing and they're talking and joking together, telling about the stories they've experienced and the adventures they've had with Jesus. Lazarus says, "Clopas was just telling me about the time Peter fell into the Sea of Galilee, when he tried to be like you and walk on water, Peter." Clopas then says to Peter, "I tell you too, the look on your face, it was priceless. Oh, one moment you were walking towards Jesus, and the next you looked over at the rising waves and splash! In you fell." Oh, Jesus, he was just standing there in the water. He was laughing. Oh, it was a good thing, Peter. He was only an arm's length away from you. The laughter swells throughout the house as everyone enjoys a moment of peace before the conflict continues. Thus ends scene 4. When we next join Joseph of Arimathea and his great-nephew Jesus, we will find them in the upper room, sharing Jesus' last meal here on earth with his closest family and friends. God bless.